Today's lesson is focused in the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy in two passages, and it is entitled Justice, Judges, and Priests. And our focus is centered in the 16th chapter of Deuteronomy, verses 18 through 20, and then also in the 17th chapter of Deuteronomy, verses 8 through 13. There are two goals that you should be able to achieve as you study these passages. Number one, you should be able to identify the type or types of justice that is written in these verses. And then two, you should be able to contrast the characteristics of just judges and then their rulings and compare them with rulings by unjust or prejudicial judges as described in these passages. So those are the two goals for you as you study. The lesson outline is divided into two sections, and they are focused in each particular passage. So section 1 might be general goals that are described in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 18 through 20. And verse 18 gives explanation for the responsible people and fair judge. And verses 19 and 20 give explanation of reliable principles that should be employed when they are engaged in this type of interaction with the court. Section 2 might be considered the specific challenges that are described in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 through 13. So verses 8, 9, 10, and 11 explain those difficult instances that occur in community life. And then Moses describes in verses 12 and 13 those instances with defiant or challenging individuals and what might be expected from the proper judgment. And those are the two sections in our study for our outline covering these two passages. As a bit of understanding, let's remember or let's consider that in the 21st century that we are living today, it is a rigorous and a demanding experience and journey to become a judge. And this process is not cheap. It's quite expensive, the tuition for school. The education, the training, and the experience is what is needed for a potential judge to be able to prepare himself or herself for the necessary foundation that is needed to render right judgments that are based in law. And that's where we are in our lesson today. Moses is giving the people some understanding through these laws that was made through the covenant code. They had engaged in different daily life experiences, and Moses is sharing when you become before a judge or a priest, this is how you should act, as well as these laws, these rules are given to these officials, the judges or the priests, so they will also rule not by favoritism or family, but according to the law that he's given. So that was how it happened in the 21st century, and of course we're reading about what happened in the Old Testament. So becoming a judge in the Old Testament of Israel was radically different from the process that is required today. But what they needed more than anything was an understanding of fairness, of justice. And this is what Moses is sharing in this week's lesson. Now let's share some interesting facts about the book of Deuteronomy. Some of you may know these points and others may need to be reminded. But if you don't know them, then keep this in mind as you engage in your study in the book of Deuteronomy. So the book of Deuteronomy, the name means second or repeated law. Sometimes you see or you hear that Deuteronomy is a reminder of what was given to them in Exodus. As they're preparing to leave this wilderness, Moses is reminding them. So it's a second or repeated law. And of course, the author is credited to be Moses. It was written around 1407 to maybe 1406 BC. It, of course, is the fifth book in our Bible. It's the fifth book of the Old Testament. And Deuteronomy is the fifth book of the Pentateuch. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy has 34 chapters, over 950 verses, and around 38,000 words, depending on the version that you use. Here are some observations that you might need to make and you may see as you're navigating through your study in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy has been called the Book of Remembrance, and it is where we learn about Moses and his discourse or his sermons or his messages to the people while they are still in the wilderness, because you do remember Moses does not enter into the promised land of Canaan. One interesting fact about this book is that this time in Deuteronomy covers about a month of experiences. The Israelites are camped in the plains of Moab, and Moses has shared in this book a series of farewell messages to the people of Israel as he enters into his senior years of 100 plus years. In fact, 120 years is how long Moses was given before God takes him home. So, just as the law of Moses had been given to the generation of the Exodus, the ones who came straight out of Egypt, now through this 40-year period of their grumbling, Moses has to give them this new law, or even those repeated, to the generation that's going to enter into Canaan. They are going to take this land. It's going to be part of their conquest. Interesting that God has given it to them again, because this generation needed to be removed from the scene because they were grumbling, and it's given generously to the ones who are going to possess the land. So, this is not a second law, but an adaptation or even an expansion of the law that Moses gave them when he was on Mount Sinai. So, you'll see that in chapters 1 through chapter 4 was his first sermon. Chapters 4 toward the end to chapter 26 is the second sermon, a message that Moses is giving, which includes our lesson today. And then the third sermon that Moses gives covers chapter 27 to chapter 34. And then there are two important passages that are highlighted in this book of Deuteronomy, and one covers our passage today, and that's in chapter 17 of Deuteronomy, verses 9 through 10. And this is when Moses speaks to the priests and the Levites, saying, "Take heed and listen, O Israel. This day you have become the people of the Lord your God. Therefore, you shall obey the voice of the Lord your God and observe his commandments and his statutes, which I command you today." That's part of our lesson today. Today, they are no longer just a family of Hebrews. They are now the Israel nation. And then the second important passage in this book of Deuteronomy is written in chapter 34, toward the end of this book, and it covers verses 10 through 12. And here is when Moses shares with them that he has seen God face to face, and all of his signs and wonders. The Lord sent him to Egypt to bring these people out before Pharaoh, before all the people, before all the servants, through the plagues, through the struggles, and by God's mighty power that God provided for him, he was able to bring these people out of Egypt right into the possession of Canaan, the promised land. As a final point of context for our lesson today, this lesson considers how the leaders of Israel, namely the judges and the priests, were to advocate for and then to implement justice among all the people of Israel, all 12 tribes of Israel, all 3-4 million people. So today's lesson comes from the portion of Deuteronomy where Moses spoke on various leadership positions and how they were to function. And that's again covered in both of our passages as well as in other parts of the Bible. Our lesson today will illustrate how the Lord demands just judgment and desires his covenant people of Israel then and for us today to be led by individuals who will demonstrate the ability to practice justice, judgment among everyone. That's our lesson's context today. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 18 through 20. Appoint judges and officials for each of your tribes in every town the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall judge the people fairly. Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the innocent. Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 through 13. If cases come before your courts that are not or too difficult for you to judge, whether bloodshed, lawsuits, or assaults, take them to the place the Lord your God will choose. Go to the Levitical priest and to the judge who is in office at that time. Inquire of them, and they will give you the verdict. You must act according to the decisions they give you at the place the Lord will choose. Be careful to do everything they instruct you to do. Act according to whatever they teach you and the decisions they give you. Do not turn aside from what they tell you to the right or to the left. Anyone who shows contempt for the judge or for the priest who stands ministering there to the Lord your God is to be put to death. You must purge the evil from Israel. All the people will hear and be afraid and will not be contemptuous again. So in conclusion, let's review or learn some interesting facts about Moses. His name means drawn forth or taken out of the water, which of course was what happened. And Moses was indeed born in Egypt. His parents were Amram and Jochebed. He is the grandson of Kohath, and he is the great-grandson of Levi, one of the brothers in the 12 tribes of Israel. So we know then that he was born the youngest of 3 children. His brother Aaron is who we read about also, who helped him in speaking before Pharaoh and to the other people in the community. And he had his sister Miriam, who also had an important role in dealing with women, speaking to the women while they were in the wilderness. We do know that Miriam and Aaron at one point challenged Moses, but as God spoke to them in different ways and brought them to some clearer understanding, then they agreed to go ahead and follow Moses. They could not be self-appointed as they thought. God ordained it for Moses to be in charge. So we read about that as well. And Moses was then educated and nurtured in the finer things of the Egyptians in the palace of Pharaoh. And some records believe that he was educated and nurtured by the hands of Pharaoh's sister. Moses was married when he was after he left Egypt. You do know that he had to leave Egypt because he ended up killing one of the Egyptians who was mistreating one of the Jewish members of that community. Moses fled, and he fled to the area of Midian. So he spent his first 40 years in Egypt from 1526 to around 1486 BC. And that's recorded in Acts as well. He spent his second 40 years in the area of Midian, and that's around 1486 to 1446 BC. That's also recorded in the book of Exodus. And Moses spent his third and final 40 years leading the children of Israel through the wilderness, again, 1446 to 1406 BC. Again, that's discussed in Deuteronomy chapter 8 as well. So Moses lived 120 years, and in the end of this book, chapter 34, we read how God took him home. And this scripture, of course, could not have been written by Moses, but it is probably credited to Joshua, who became the leader who took the people over into the promised land. Again, most of you should know that Moses wrote the first 5 books of our Bible, called the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Did you know that he is also credited for writing the 90th division of Psalms? So, in learning about Moses and the leader that he became through God's nurturing and all of his encounters with the people and with God himself, we realize that the story of Moses demonstrates quite a lot for us today. He's credited for these recording the 10 Commandments that God gave him on the Mount of Sinai. He's also was given the assignment to write those 600 plus covenant code laws and regulations for how people were to engage, which is where our lesson is centered in how to engage in court issues and before the judges and before the priests. These are just a few facts that you may not have remembered, or you may be reflecting on today, how God used Moses in these tremendous and impacting ways. I trust that you have learned something and you have asked God to speak to you. We thank you for studying with us, and we look forward to you studying with us again. If you like us, we hope that you will push that button and share this video with others. Please leave a comment so we can respond back to you. And if you so choose, subscribe. We, of course, would love to have you know some of our upcoming videos. And until we see you next week and studying for next week's Sunday school lesson, you stay safe and healthy. I'm Dr. Christy.